Alright, we're back. We're talking some FF7. We're talking some Remake Part 3. I think mostly in this video, maybe exclusively. I don't entirely know. There's a couple interviews that dropped yesterday with Hamaguchi and Kitase, with like Automaton, and then Dinfama Nico, I think is how you say this shit. And maybe there's other ones too. I don't entirely know. I haven't really scrolled the feeds yet. By the way, before we get into this, I have seen the quote from Hamaguchi regarding like the Cloud and Aerith, like sisterly thing that we talked about not too long ago. I think it's from one of these interviews. I think we're going to talk about that by itself tomorrow because we're probably going to talk about it for like a couple minutes. I don't want to spend like too long on, one particular subject in this video because I think we got like a decent amount of things to talk about. I did have a couple people hit me up on that video. I think they're, Clarith people. Like this was some sort of gotcha from Hamaguchi, and it's not, unfortunately, for them. They just, another L. The main thing I've seen over the last like 24 hours, though, is that Kitase, I believe, confirmed that the scenario for Part 3 has been done since like late last year, which is pretty cool to hear, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that's actually new information, but we'll get to that when we get to it in the video. There's also some talk of like Cid and Vincent, like them being playable and things like that, and then I think like Kitase also talked about like kind of the ending of Part 3, obviously not anything spoilery, but he has talked about the ending to a certain degree. And then there's probably other shit that I haven't seen yet, so let's hop into it. So we're just going to start with Shinra Archaeology Department and kind of scroll the feed and see what's out there. FF7 Rebirth director Naoki Hamaguchi says he heard a ton of players saying they want them to leave that slappy minigame in. To them, he says, I think we're going to deliver something really top-notch, so please be excited. So it seems like in one way or another, they're going to deliver something in regards to that segment of the game that people want. Whether or not it's going to be actually like a minigame of Tifa and Scarlet slapping the shit out of each other, I don't know. It could also just be like a one-on-one boss fight with like Scarlet and Tifa. Obviously, if we're just talking hand-to-hand, Tifa's beating that ass all day. The two boss fights we've had with Scarlet and also the boss fight we have with Palmer have been with like mech suit sort of thing, so it could be that potentially, like Tifa versus Scarlet in a mech suit. It's one of those like kind of quirky, funny moments from the original FF7 that you don't really need to change. Like you don't need to like update it and do something new with it. Really, just make it like it was in the original FF7. We just want to see Tifa slap the shit out of Scarlet. That's it. Hamaguchi says, if our goal is A and they get an opinion like, I want B instead, they can't do anything about it as it's just someone's preference. However, if there's an opinion like, if you add B too, wouldn't it be even better? Then he'll think about incorporating it. Hamaguchi says that once he's decided on a concept or vision, he doesn't waver. He says he uses logic to come up with answers. He doesn't just arrive at a single choice by coincidence, but rather there is a kind of accumulated reasoning behind everything. So as for the first part of that quote, like I think you kind of need somebody like that whenever you're making a project, right? You gotta have somebody that's like kind of firm on what they want and be open to ideas, obviously, but they can't just, if everybody's input always matters, then you're gonna like end up with a fucked up project, right? So you gotta have somebody that's like kind of has a see-through line. They want this, this, and this, and then you can kind of add to it as you go, right? Ultimately, he is the director of these games, so I think he does and should have the most like kind of say and input on that shit. And I mean, look at Rebirth versus Remake, right? I think the majority of people out there would agree that Rebirth is a better game than Remake, so I think like his vision is obviously pretty good. As for how Kitase makes choices, he's the opposite of Hamaguchi. Kitase says he's not at all a hard science type of guy. He sort of just goes with his gut and says, alright, this'll do. Kitase says he can't talk about the upcoming title, but for the third game scenario, he's involved in the initial plot and contributed ideas about wanting to change the sensation people get after completing the third game compared to the OG, it being the conclusion of the trilogy. There's actually more to read from the Kitase quote, but I want to pause there for a second just because he's talking about wanting to have like a different sensation that you get at the end of the trilogy versus the end of the original FF7. Which, if for some reason you never played the original FF7, it just kind of ends. Like, you just, summon Holy, and Livestream comes out to help Holy stop Meteor, and then, like, the game just fades to black. You get a post-credit scene that's supposed to tell you, kind of what actually happened, but you don't know if, like, humanity was wiped out, right? Because they talk about that in the game, that Holy might deem humans a threat to the planet and fucking wipe out everybody. According to Kitase, we're going to get some sort of different sensation at the end of the trilogy versus the end of the original FF7, which is not a surprise. We talked about that before on the channel quite a few times. They're going to give us something, right? It's not just going to fade to black. Like, I don't know what they're going to do exactly. If they're going to kind of lead into Avid Children, the developing of like the City of Edge or something like that, or whatever the hell. But we're going to get something, a kind of nice, conclusive ending, as opposed to just fading to black, which is such an insane ending. I don't know why they went that route. But when it comes to integrating that into the actual game, he leaves the continuity and logic to the on-site staff. Hamaguchi thinks the creative part of the final scene depicting Aerith's fate is how they wanted to move players' hearts, but in order to get to that point, they have to think about the emotional twists and turns to present to the player. And so logic plays a very important role in terms of making the game interesting, stuff like level design. Once you've thought things out logically to a certain extent, then you can proceed artistically. That's where your skill really comes into play. I've also seen another quote from Kitase in either maybe this interview or a different interview, where he talks about the ending as well with like Aerith and her fate and kind of essentially sort of the same thing they kind of got from that scene, what they wanted, the kind of the reaction from players. We've talked about it a lot. I just think it was a scene that wasn't like totally bad. I just think it was handled weirdly. I actually kind of like the concept of Cloud not accepting her fate, right? But like the jumping back and forth between her being dead, not being dead, Cloud talking to her, not talking to her, Cloud talking, but we don't hear it, where he's like mouthing words, but he's just saying the lines from the original FF7 about his like mouth being dry, eyes burning, that whole shit. Like he says that shit. Like, she's dead 100%. But they did that in that way to kind of garner like discussion amongst the community. That's the whole point of it. It's like, I don't like that. You took this like iconic scene in death in video gaming, right? The most iconic death, and you altered it just so people talk about it for the next couple of years till we get to the next game. And I'm just not a fan of that. About whether Cid and Vincent will be fully controllable and move along with you on the world map, it's hard for me to state clearly right now whether they'll be playable, but I think that's an element players are naturally expecting, so I think that in a way is its own answer. This one I thought was a bit weird because I feel like in the past they've outright confirmed that they're going to be controllable party members, and obviously they are, because why would they be? They're the only party members left we don't have, and if we just in some weird reality weren't getting like Cid and Vincent as playable characters in the next game, there'd be no new characters to play. Like, we'd only have who we already have, which they're still fun to use, but like, goddamn, we're obviously looking forward to new party members. And obviously, if we didn't have Cid and Vincent as playable characters in the next game, this would piss off 99.9% of the community. There might be like somebody out there who doesn't give a shit, but the majority of people would give a shit if you couldn't play a Cid and or Vincent. I've said countless times on this channel that like Vincent's combat in the next game is something I'm maybe looking forward to the most. It might be more important to me than some of the story elements in the next game, dude, just because like, I want to know how they're going to handle that and how many monster forms we're going to have. Are we just going to have Galleon Beast that we fought in Rebirth? Are we going to have some of his other monster forms? Are they going to incorporate chaos into it? Is he going to have different kind of guns that we can use, right? Like, there's all kinds of stuff I want to know. I'm very much looking forward to it. So also interested in how they're going to handle Cid's combat, but I just don't even have any ideas for that. Like, what do you do with the Dragoon kind of character in the remake project? I don't know. FF7 Rebirth director Naoki Hamaguchi says he can't give a detailed answer right now, but they're aiming to create more chances for players to experience the Final Fantasy VII franchise, as Kitase has also stated. This year and in those following, they're brainstorming ways to introduce Final Fantasy VII to a new fan base. You can expect some more developments on that front, so please look forward to it. The most obvious thing with this is bringing the remake project to other platforms, as we've talked a lot about lately, bringing it to Xbox and Nintendo and cell phones if that's possible. Besides that, what else is there? It's already on PlayStation, it's already on Epic and Steam. Like, what else you got? There was a time not so long ago that Google Stadia was an option, but that's obviously long gone at this point. So it's like, what else is there? I will say, though, with their translation, maybe it's a translation thing, Hamaguchi is just saying bringing FF7 to more people. He could be referencing the remake project, but he could be talking about something else entirely, like a new project, whether that's like animated series or whatever that we've talked about in the past, right? A new movie, a new game, whatever, like a spin-off game or some shit. Like, I'm down for all of it, dude. I'm the kind of person that's like, there's never too much FF7. There can be bad FF7 stuff like the first Soldier game. But overall, like, you can just keep making FF7 content, and I'm down for it, dude. For Remake Project Story, Hamaguchi says he and Kitase and also Nomura have consistently claimed that to a certain extent, it will conform to the flow of the OG, and so locations you expect to appear in Part 3, along with the elements pertaining to them, will show up. Therefore, he hopes everyone will let their imaginations run wild as they await the game's release. So this isn't really, like, I would say news, just because we kind of expect that, right? Like he says, like, people expect those elements to be there, they'll probably be there. So I take from that, like, the snowboarding minigame with Icicle and Great Glacier kind of area, that's probably going to be there, of course. I mean, we know snowboarding's going to be there, but that's just an example. I am looking forward to the locations we haven't seen yet when it comes to the remake project. I also want, like, new stuff too, and kind of specifically, I mean, like, stuff from the compilation, because when it comes to, like, the North Continent area, there's not a lot of locations, right? There's Icicle Inn, Great Glacier, Guy's Cliff, and then the North Crater. And then, I guess you have, like, Chocobo Sage's house, but we already had Chocobo Sage in Rebirth, so I don't know if they're going to do that or not. Specifically in Crisis Core, we have Modeoheim, which is a location that's in the Icicle Inn area. It's, like, south of Icicle Inn. But the mission to Modeoheim is where Cloud and Zack first meet each other. It's where you get the reveal of Cloud for the first time in Crisis Core. And it's also where the Me Gungaga meme comes from.
Me?
Gungaga. Even though it is a kind of relatively unimportant location, it's just one mission you go on in Crisis Core. You never even go back there. It does kick off the relationship between Zack and Cloud, right? So I think it's a location you could use for some good storytelling shit with the third game. Like, not it's part of the story or just an optional thing you could do in the third game. I think it'd be great to, like, have Cloud go there and get, like, a flashback of, like, meeting Zack for the first time, right? Because he already remembers who Zack is with Rebirth. He just doesn't remember everything that happened between them. Hamaguchi says they have no plans at all to significantly cut down on the number of minigames in the third part of the trilogy. What he said before is that they're not going to implement them the same way they did in the second installment, that they're going to make some changes. But he thinks in translation his words got misinterpreted a little, and instead people heard there will be fewer minigames in Part 3. This I thought was kind of interesting just because we've looked at a quote before from Hamaguchi that straight up says they're going to do less minigames. Now, I don't know if there's mistranslation in that interview. It was an interview with Daily Star. I think we probably read Genki's tweet, but I don't know if Genki translated something or if he's just pulling directly from the Daily Star interview and maybe they did a mistranslation. But at least according to this tweet, it's straight up saying that there's going to be less minigames. We've read this tweet and quote before, but we'll read it again really quickly. There was a certain number of people who said there were too many minigames in Rebirth, and ultimately I can see their point of view. But I do think we made the right decision in terms of the breadth and volume of content for the minigames in Rebirth, but certainly looking forward to the third game and to other games. If you ask me, would I do the same number of minigames? I don't think I would. We'll work out how maybe we can cut it down to maybe a bit more manageable size for the group of players who quite rightly said that maybe there was too much there for them. So again, unless there's some sort of mistranslation, or maybe Hamaguchi forgot that he said that in that particular interview, but if that quote is correct, he straight up says they're going to cut it down to size and make it more manageable, right? For people that thought there was too many minigames. So, I don't know. Be kind of ways, regardless of that, I'm fine with a lot of minigames in a Final Fantasy game. Of course, that's something we're all used to. But the problem with Rebirth is, not all of them were fun, right? Like, they're just not fun. Like, the piano minigame, it's not even really hard. I definitely talked a lot of shit about it for quite a long time on the channel. But once I actually got to my platinum playthrough and committing to playing the piano minigame, it's actually very easy. A couple of the songs I beat on my first try, even though I feel like I suck at that game. Also, you have minigames like the 3D Brawler, which I wasn't a fan of. I didn't like in the original FF7 either. But in this game, like, depending on what kind of attack they're doing, like what angle they're punching from, you gotta block a certain way. And even with like the pause strike, it's hard to tell because of the kind of polygon blocky character models. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes what punch they're actually going for. And a lot of people out there will defend the minigames because they're optional. This is something we've been hearing for almost a fucking year now. And it's never made sense to me because we can't criticize the mini games in Rebirth because they're optional. You're not forced to do it. It's not a part of the story. And it's like, when has that ever mattered? Does that mean we can't criticize side quests in an RPG? Like, because it's an optional thing that you do, you don't have to do it. You can't say it's good or bad. Also, it's not even entirely true because you have a mini game like Gears and Gambits, which I think is pretty terrible. And I think a lot of people agree with that too. But you actually get pretty substantial lore for like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, right? And you get like some sort of like closure for Barrett and Tifa if you do that minigame. So I also like the lore and story behind Queen's Blood, right? And maybe that's a minigame you just didn't particularly like when it came to Rebirth. But also behind a lot of the minigames in the game, there's really good rewards, whether that's, accessories, materia, or weapons for any particular character. And who in the right mind would go up to a minigame, see that there's a new weapon for one of the characters, and wouldn't want to play the minigame? But also, one of the biggest problems with all the minigames in Rebirth is it being tied to the trophies and ultimately the platinum. Because if you want to go for the platinum in Rebirth, you have to do literally everything, and everything on hard difficulty. Actually, speaking of rewards from the minigame, some of the best rewards you get in the game are dark matter. There's a very limited amount of dark matter in the game, and you get a lot of it from the minigame. So maybe I don't like the minigames in Rebirth, but I do love the crafting system, so I want to craft everything. But if I want to craft everything, I have to do all the minigames. So you're actually wrong when you say it's not required. It's definitely something they can tweak and balance in the next game. It's not that I don't want there to be good rewards from the minigames, because I'm fine with that, but it's just like, some of them are just annoying. It's like, for a lot of minigames that like took a lot of tries, there's never like a sense of accomplishment. I was just like, fuck, finally it's over. Like, goddamn, I'm tired of doing this shit. Hamaguchi says they don't have any such plans to update or expand Queen's Blood in FF7 Rebirth at the moment. Players often ask if they can release it as a smartphone app, but right now they're really trying to focus on producing the third part of the trilogy. So they're not thinking about creating a separate application for the Queen's Blood IP at present. However, they're extremely open to the idea of including Queen's Blood in Part 3. But if they do, they'd want it to be in a way that's distinct to Part 3 with its own adjustments and enhancements, and not just a rehash of how it was implemented in the previous game. They're actually really committed to expanding things like that. There's another one I thought was kind of weird just because Hamaguchi's being kind of vague about whether or not they're going to have Queen's Blood in the next game, right? He says they're open to the idea of it, but I'm pretty damn sure in multiple previous interviews, they've more or less outright said it's going to be the next game. But he's talked about, wanting to adjust it, make it kind of unique where it's a little bit different from Rebirth. But I don't know why he's like in this interview, like, we're kind of open to the idea. Like, fucking of course it's going to be the next game. It's so overwhelmingly popular. It'd be pretty goddamn stupid to not have it in the next game. I also understand them not having like a smartphone app ready to go or like physical versions of Queen's Blood ready to sell because they probably didn't think it'd be as popular as it is. But it is something that I think it'd be dumb for them not to capitalize on at some point, whether they make a physical version of it, some sort of smartphone app version of Queen's Blood, whatever it is. People want more of it, right? It's just them leaving money on the table to not capitalize on it. Discussing why the devs allowed players to fast forward through their painstakingly crafted cutscenes for Remake, Hamaguchi says many people will watch videos and movies at double speed. He thinks we're in an age where we should let the user decide what kind of experience they have. Hamaguchi mentions that after they implemented the update, the number of users booting up Remake on PS5 and PC increased. For this reason, he mentions that they are also planning to implement such time-saving features in the final part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy too. This obviously is a good thing because it's a quality of life feature if you want to fast forward through like cutscenes or cutscenes in battle or whatever the fuck. I do think it's something that maybe you should put behind the first playthrough, kind of like how you can't do outfits until your first playthrough, until you don't get chapters selected until your first playthrough, stuff like that, right? So I think it's something that you should like kind of make people have to like experience the story first, and then on that second playthrough they can kind of speed through everything. Kitase says the scenario for Part 3 of the FF7 Remake project was completed by Nomura at the end of last year, and he is very satisfied with it. As the next part is the conclusion, I gave Nomura the homework that I want something that would respect the original, while also giving a sense of satisfaction beyond what could be experienced in the original, something that would conclude the remake project. This was finally handed in at the end of the year, and the scenario for the third installment was then completed. I'm very satisfied with it, so I'm sure it'll be a satisfying conclusion for fans as well. There's obviously an expansion of something we read previously in the video, but also including that the story or the scenario for Part 3 is done as of the end of last year. But I mentioned towards the beginning of the video that I don't think that's necessarily new information, because we got from the Ultimania last year that Nojima was pretty much already done with the story back then, and the Ultimania came out I think around April of last year, but the interview was done with Nojima in February of last year. So as of February of last year, he was almost done with the story. So we've known for a while the story was pretty much done. Maybe they took the rest of 2024 to like tweak it and alter it, make sure it's perfect or whatever, and then like it's finalized by the end of 2024. But at least like the concept of the story being done is pretty old information. A lot of people sharing this like it was brand new information, and I guess it technically sort of is. But I mean, if people follow the channel, they would have known the story was done 9 months ago. This to me is a bit of non-news, but I figure we'd read it anyways. Kitase says Part 3 of the FF7 Remake trilogy will not be a next-gen PS6 exclusive, like Remake and Rebirth were PS4 and PS5 gen exclusives. For those who played FF7 Remake on PS4 and FF7 Rebirth on PS5, I imagine there may be some concern that the third game will be for next-gen consoles. No, you can rest assured about the next one. Hamaguchi then added that in the future Square Enix will release games on a wide range of platforms so that more people can play them. He says right now he can't promise anything, but will do his best as they want many people to play the games they make. I know this is a bit of a concern for people out there, but it was just never going to be the case. It was never going to happen, right? It does look strange on paper because Remake was PS4 exclusive, Rebirth was PS5 exclusive, so there is that level of like, is it going to be PS6 exclusive? But the difference is Remake came out at the tail end of the PS4's life cycle, and Rebirth came out in around the middle, maybe a little bit past the halfway point of the PS5's life cycle. And realistically, right now, we're about 2 years away or so from the third game coming out, right? 2027. And by then, we might start getting into the discussions of the PS6. Maybe the rumors start happening or whatever. But it's not going to be out yet, right? The third game definitely would never be a PS6 exclusive. That doesn't mean there won't be a PS6 version of the game and maybe also Rebirth and or Remake. But it's just not going to be next-gen exclusive, right? It's going to be current-gen. Some more Part 3 stuff. Naoki Hamaguchi says the development of Part 3 of the FF7 Remake project is going very well and is on schedule. It is going very well. After FF7 Rebirth was finished, we immediately started working on the third game, and by the end of 2024, we completed a build that was able to confirm what we should aim for as a game. We can already see the direction where we want to land, so we've been working towards that since the beginning of this year. We're proceeding without delay from the schedule we planned when we started the Remake project, so we hope you will look forward to it. So this is actually some pretty good info, because it's always good to get an update that development's going smoothly, but also that by the end of 2024, they had a build that could give them an idea of what kind of game they should be making. So that means they probably have like maybe the framework of like the open world, kind of the seamless world with like the Highwind potentially, something along those lines. There's also a follow-up tweet that they had started development around March or April of last year, so they've been in development for Part 3 for about 9 months. Around March or April of this year, they'll be in development on Part 3 for about a year. So again, I think a 2027 release window is perfectly reasonable. Naoki Hamaguchi says he would like to bring some of the FF7 Rebirth PC upgrades to the PS5 version at some point. When we released the promotional video for the PC version, we received a lot of requests for a similar update for the PS5 version, and I'm thinking we would like to make it happen at some point within the limits of what is possible with the PS5 version's performance. It's pretty cool because it means we might not be done getting updates for the PS5 version of Rebirth. Now, I don't know if he's talking base PS5 or the Pro, since the Pro is, you know, a stronger console, but maybe we'll still be getting updates and maybe some sort of enhancements that the PC version of Rebirth has. Dudes, I think that's where we're going to wrap the video up. It's getting kind of girthy, if I'm honest. And it's getting kind of late, too. There's definitely more to talk about, more translations and stuff out there from other interviews. We'll do another video in the next day or two or something, but we're definitely going to talk about the Hamaguchi, Cloud, Aerith sister stuff tomorrow for sure. Unless something drastically more important happens tomorrow, we'll definitely be talking about that. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.